In the middle of a blinding snowstorm that shut down every major road through the Lake District Fells, I stood alone inside an abandoned service station with less than £40 in my wallet and a repossession notice burned into my mind. I had nothing. No wife, no future, no way out. Then a black luxury sedan pulled off the road and stopped. A woman stepped out. Her voice cut through the cold. She said only one thing. "We need shelter, please." I did not know who she was. I did not know that opening the door would change everything for both of us. The service station had been closed for years before I moved in. The owner, an old man named Harold, who lived in the next valley, had offered me a deal after my divorce, left me with nothing but a bag of clothes and a toolbox. Watch the place, keep the pipes from freezing, make sure nobody strips the copper wire from the walls. In return, you can sleep in the back office, use the water, and pretend you still have an address. It was not charity, Harold had said. It was just cheaper than hiring a security firm. I took the deal because I had no other option, and because saying yes to something, anything, felt better than saying no to everything. Before the divorce, I had run a small engine repair shop just off the A66. I was good with machines, always had been. The kind of man who could listen to an engine idle and tell you exactly which part was dying. For 12 years, the shop paid the bills, kept my son fed, kept the lights on. Then I made the mistake of expanding. I took a loan to lease a bigger space, bought equipment I did not need, hired 2 lads I could not afford. Within 18 months, the shop bled out. The bank took the building, the creditors took everything else. My son, now 23 and living in Leeds, stopped calling after the second time I could not make the rent on my own flat. It was not anger, it was something worse. It was distance. Now I lived in the back of a service station off a mountain road in the Lake District that saw maybe 10 cars a day in good weather and none when the snow came. I had a space heater that ran on a generator I kept fed with whatever fuel I could afford. I had a cot, a small refrigerator, and a radio that pulled in 2 stations, one country, one static. The debt notice had arrived some time ago, forwarded from an address I no longer lived at. It informed me in language that felt almost polite that my remaining debt had been transferred to a collection agency and that my independent contractor license was under review pending resolution. I read it once, folded it, and put it in the glove compartment of my truck. I had not opened it since. When the storm hit, I was sitting in the main room of the service station, the old waiting area with its cracked tile floor and plastic chairs bolted to metal rails, eating canned soup heated on a portable burner. The radio had warned about the snowstorm since morning, but the forecast said it would pass south. It did not. As the evening drew in, the wind came first, slamming against the windows hard enough to rattle the frames. Then the snow followed, not falling but driving sideways, thick and blinding, like something alive and furious. Within an hour, the road was buried. The power, which was already unreliable, flickered twice and then gave up entirely. I switched on the generator and sat in the yellow glow of a single work lamp, listening to the world outside disappear. I did not expect anyone. The road had been empty for hours. The police had probably closed the routes miles back. So when I heard the engine, muffled and struggling, I stood up and looked through the front window and saw nothing but white. Then headlights cut through the snow, weak and low, and a black sedan crawled into the service station car park like an animal looking for a place to die. It stopped at an angle, the rear tires sliding slightly on the ice. The engine shut off. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the rear passenger door opened and a woman stepped out into the storm. She was wearing a dark wool coat that probably cost more than everything I owned combined. Her silver blonde hair, cropped short, was already wet with snow. She walked toward the service station entrance without hesitation, as if she had decided before the car even stopped that this was where she was going. Behind her, the driver's door opened, and a broad-shouldered man in a black jacket stepped out, squinting against the wind. He did not follow her right away. He stood by the car, one hand on the roof, looking at the building as though calculating whether it was safe. I met her at the front door. She looked at me the way people look at things they do not understand, yet not with fear, but with a fast, precise kind of assessment. Her face was pale from the cold. Her lips were almost blue. She did not introduce herself. She did not explain. She said, "We need shelter, please." And her voice cracked on the last word, not from emotion, but from the raw air tearing at her throat. I looked past her at the sedan, at the driver still standing in the snow, at the storm swallowing the road behind us. I thought about the generator, which had only a little fuel left. I thought about the canned food I had rationed to last through the week. I thought about the fact that I did not know these people, that the woman's coat alone made me feel as though I was standing on the wrong side of a window, looking in at a life I would never have. I thought about the door and how easy it would be to say the place was closed, condemned, unsafe, all of which were technically true. But I had grown up in a town where people plowed each other's driveways without being asked. My father had once driven 40 miles in a thunderstorm to pull a stranger's car out of a ditch, and when I asked him why, the old man had said, "Because nobody should sit in the dark alone if somebody can help it." That was years ago. My father was dead now. The town was half empty. The world had changed, but that sentence had stayed lodged somewhere between my ribs, like a splinter I never wanted to remove. I stepped aside and held the door open. "It is not much," I said. "The generator is running, but I cannot promise how long. There is no heat except what the space heater puts out, no food except what I have in cans." I looked at the woman. "But you are welcome to stay until the road opens." The woman stepped inside without thanking me. Not out of rudeness. I could tell the difference. It was the way someone moves when they are too cold and too tired for manners, when survival temporarily outranks everything else. Her driver followed a minute later, stomping snow from his boots, carrying a leather bag and a phone that he kept checking even though there was clearly no signal. He introduced himself as Declan and shook my hand with a firm grip, then immediately began assessing the space. Exits, windows, structural integrity, with the trained eye of someone who had been paid to keep people safe for a long time. Victoria Lennox, though I would not learn her full name until later, sat down in one of the plastic chairs and stared at the space heater as if it were a fireplace. The orange glow reflected in her eyes, and for a moment she looked almost human in a way that contradicted everything about her appearance. The coat, the posture, the precision of her movements, all of it said control. But her eyes in that first quiet minute said something else entirely. They said exhaustion. Not the kind you fix with sleep. The kind that accumulates over years of making decisions that cost other people things you never have to see. I brought her a cup of instant coffee heated on the burner, served in a chipped ceramic mug that said, "World's okayest dad." A gift from my son given as a joke during a Christmas that now felt as though it belonged to someone else's life. She took it with both hands and drank without asking what was in it. Declan declined the coffee but accepted a bottle of water and positioned himself near the front window, watching the storm like a man who did not trust the weather to stay outside. None of us spoke much in those first minutes. The wind filled the silence well enough. I sat across from the woman, close enough to be available, but far enough to give her space. I did not ask her name. I did not ask where she was going. I had learned in the months since my life collapsed that people who end up in places like this do not want questions. They want walls, a roof, and the quiet understanding that nobody is going to make them explain how they got there. Outside, the snow kept falling. The road was gone. Not closed, but erased as if it had never existed. The temperature was dropping fast. I checked the generator, calculated the fuel, and decided that if I turned off the overhead light and relied only on the work lamp, I could stretch it until morning. I made the adjustment without mentioning it. The room dimmed, the space heater hummed, and 3 strangers sat in a half-dead service station on a mountain road. Nobody was coming to rescue us from each other, each carrying a version of ruin we had not yet said out loud. Later that night, the storm settled into a steady, grinding assault. Not the violent bursts of the first hours, but a constant low roar that pressed against the walls of the service station like something testing for weakness. The temperature inside had dropped enough that I could see my own breath when I stood more than 5 feet from the space heater. I dragged a second chair closer to the heater for Victoria and offered her a wool blanket I kept folded on my cot. She accepted it without protest, wrapping it around her shoulders with the efficiency of someone who understood that pride was a luxury the cold did not respect. Declan had made himself useful in the way men like him always do, quietly, without asking permission. He checked every door and window, found a draft coming through a cracked seal on the back exit, and stuffed it with rags from a supply cupboard I had forgotten existed. Then he went back to his post near the front window, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, arms crossed, eyes half closed but never fully shut. I recognized the posture. It was the way you sat when you had spent most of your life being responsible for someone else's safety, when rest was something you did in layers, never all at once. The woman, she still had not given her name, sat in the plastic chair with her legs crossed and the blanket pulled tight. Her phone was on her lap, dark and useless. I noticed she kept glancing at it, not to check for a signal, but almost out of habit, the way someone reaches for something that has always been there and suddenly is not. Everything about her suggested a person used to controlling her environment, the way she held her coffee, the way she scanned the room when she thought nobody was watching, the way she gave instructions to Declan in short, precise sentences that were not rude but left no room for debate. She was a woman who made decisions for a living, and being stuck in a place where she could not make any was clearly something her body did not know how to process. I, on the other hand, had become very good at sitting still. Months of living in this service station had taught me that silence was not emptiness. It was just a different kind of full. I sat across from her, close enough to share the heater's warmth, and worked on a small transistor radio I had been trying to fix for weeks. My hands moved steadily, stripping wire, twisting connectors, testing frequencies. It was the kind of work that kept my mind from wandering into the places I did not want it to go: the debt, the notice, the son who did not call. "You live here?" It was not a question. Victoria said it while looking at the cot visible through the half-open office door, at the line of canned goods on the shelf, at the toothbrush standing in a coffee can near the sink. Her voice was flat, not unkind but observational, the way someone reads data from a spreadsheet. I did not look up from the radio. "I keep the place from falling apart. The owner lets me stay." "God did." I said it the way I had practiced saying it casually, as if it were an arrangement I had chosen rather than one I had fallen into. I could feel her looking at me, measuring the distance between what I said and what was obviously true. And I kept my hands busy because that was the only way to keep the conversation from going where I did not want it to go. Victoria pulled the blanket tighter. "I run a company," she said. "Renewable energy, solar and wind mostly. We have contracts across the country." She delivered the information like a resume, but I heard something underneath it. Not pride, but defense. She was telling me who she was because the room had stripped away every visible marker of it. Without her car, her phone, her schedule, her name on a building. She was just a woman in a cold room wrapped in a stranger's blanket, and I suspected that terrified her more than the storm. I nodded but did not respond with anything about myself. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the hum of the generator and the wind outside. I twisted a wire on the radio and got a burst of static, then nothing. I set it down and leaned back in my chair, looking at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights were off, and the work lamp cast long shadows that made the room feel smaller than it was, almost intimate in a way neither of us had agreed to. "Across the country," I said after a while, not mockingly, but with the quiet weight of someone doing sums in his head. "That is a lot of territory to manage." Victoria looked at me as if she were deciding whether the comment was genuine or a setup. "It is," she said. "And right now, every one of those contracts is sitting on a table in a conference room in Manchester waiting for me to show up and explain why our third quarter projections fell short by 22%. She said it the way you confess something to a stranger at a bar, not because you trust them, but because you know you will never see them again. The storm had made the service station into a confessional, and the rules of the outside world did not apply here. I understood that feeling. I had spent enough time alone to know that sometimes the only person you could be honest with was someone who had no power over your life. So when the conversation drifted slowly, without either of us steering it, toward the things we carried, I did not fight it. It started with small things. Victoria mentioned that she had not eaten since breakfast, and that the breakfast had been a protein bar in the back seat of the car. I heated a second can of soup, chicken noodle, the same brand I had been eating for weeks, and handed it to her in the same chipped mug. She ate slowly without complaint, and somewhere in the middle of that quiet meal, the distance between us began to close. Not because we had anything in common, but because hunger and cold do not care about tax brackets or job titles. They reduce everyone to the same basic needs. And meeting those needs for each other creates a kind of equality that no boardroom or bank statement can replicate. In the early hours, the generator coughed twice and then steadied. I checked the fuel level and calculated that we had a little more left. I told Victoria and Declan without drama, just the facts, just the timeline. Declan suggested we could siphon fuel from the sedan, and I said I had a hand pump in the back. The two of us went outside into the storm, worked in the dark for a while, and came back with enough diesel to see us through. It was practical, wordless cooperation, the kind that happens when people stop performing their roles and just do what needs to be done. When I came back inside, hands red and numb, Victoria was standing near the shelf where I kept my few personal belongings. She was not touching anything, just looking. Her eyes moved over the debt notice I had left folded next to a stack of paperbacks, the one I thought I had hidden well enough. She did not mention it, but when I sat back down, something in her face had changed. The assessment was gone. In its place was something closer to recognition. The look of someone who realizes the ground they are standing on is no more stable than the ground beneath the person across from them. "My son thinks I chose the company over him," Victoria said. The statement arrived without introduction, connected to nothing we had been discussing, as if it had been sitting behind her teeth for hours and finally slipped out. He is 31, lives in Edinburgh, works for a non-profit that builds affordable housing. He has not spoken to me in 2 years. She looked at me directly. He says, "I do not know how to see people, only numbers." I felt the words land in a place I had not expected. My own son was 23, living in Leeds, and the last time we had spoken was a brief phone call some months ago that ended with my boy saying, "I just do not know what to say to you anymore, Dad." I had not told anyone about that call. I did not tell Victoria either. But something about the way she said it, flat, clinical, the way you describe a wound you have stopped trying to heal, made me feel as though she would understand if I did. "I had a repair shop," I said. I was not sure why I was talking. The words came out slowly, carefully, like I was testing each one before letting it go. 12 years, did good work, steady. Then I got it in my head that bigger was better. Took a loan I could not carry. Hired people I could not pay. I stared at the space heater, watching the coils glow orange. Lost the shop, lost the house, lost the marriage. Now I am looking at losing my contractor's license because the debt went to collections and there is a review process that I cannot afford a solicitor to fight. I let out a breath that was not a sigh, but something heavier, something that carried the full weight of admitting to a stranger what I had been unable to admit to myself. I am broke, not struggling, broke. The kind of broke where you count cans of soup and call it budgeting. Victoria did not offer sympathy. She did not say she was sorry or that things would get better. Instead, she looked at me with an expression I could only describe as honest. "I am sitting on a company worth £400 million on paper," she said. "And some time ago, I approved a restructuring plan that eliminated 215 jobs in communities that had no other employer. I did it because the numbers made sense. I did not visit a single one of those towns. I did not look at a single name on the list." Her jaw tightened. "The board is meeting soon to discuss my leadership. What they are actually discussing is whether I have become a liability, and the answer is yes. Not because I made bad decisions, but because I made decisions that were technically correct and completely wrong." The room felt different after that. Not warmer, not safer, but stripped, like two people who had taken off armor they did not know they were wearing. I understood in that moment that she and I were not as different as the surface suggested. I was bankrupt in the way the world measures money, credit, professional standing. She was bankrupt in the way that does not show on a balance sheet: empathy, connection, the basic human ability to see the cost of your choices in someone else's face. Both of us had lost things we could not buy back, and both of us were sitting in a cold room, pretending we still had time to fix it. We did not talk much after that. The storm continued. Declan dozed by the window. Victoria and I sat in the glow of the space heater, two people who had accidentally told each other the truth and now had to figure out how to exist in the same room with that knowledge. It was uncomfortable in the way honesty always is, not because it hurts, but because it removes the option of pretending. When the snow had slowed, gray light crept through the windows, and the car park outside was buried under a thick layer of white. The road was still impassable, but the wind had died down enough that the world felt navigable again. Declan was outside clearing snow from the sedan with a scraper he had found in my truck. Victoria was standing by the window watching him work when her phone, which she had placed on the windowsill hours ago, suddenly lit up. A single bar of signal, fragile and temporary, but enough. It buzzed several times in quick succession. She picked it up and read the messages with a face that did not move. I was cleaning up the cans and mugs when I heard her voice go quiet in a way I had not heard before. She was on the phone, standing near the back of the room, speaking in short, clipped sentences that I could not fully make out. But the tone was unmistakable, the tone of someone being told something they already knew but had not been ready to hear out loud. When she hung up, she stood still for a long time, staring at the phone in her hand like it was a thing that had betrayed her. "The board voted this morning," she said without turning around. "Preliminary vote. Advisory, not binding, but the signal is clear. They want me out." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the fracture underneath, not in the words, but in the spaces between them. 23 years I built that company, and they did it over a conference call while I was stuck in a service station on a mountain road. I did not know what to say to that. I had no frame of reference for losing a £400 million company, but I knew what it felt like to have something you built with your hands taken away by people who had never touched it. And that was close enough. I stood by the counter, dish towel in my hand, and said the only honest thing I could think of. "I am sorry." Victoria turned and looked at me, and in that look I saw something shift. She was seeing me differently now, not as a man in a service station, not as a charity case, but as the only person in her current world who had treated her like a human being instead of a position. And with that recognition came something I had not anticipated. She said, "Let me help you." The words hit me like cold water. I felt my chest tighten, not with gratitude, but with something closer to alarm, because I understood instantly and completely what was happening. She had the power to make a phone call and clear my debt, to connect me with solicitors who could save my license, to write a check that would pull me out of the hole I had been drowning in for months. And she was offering it now in this room after I had fed her soup and given her a blanket and opened a door I could have kept closed. The maths was simple. The kindness had a price tag now, and I could not afford to accept it. "No," I said. The word came out harder than I intended. I set the towel down and looked at her directly. "I did not open that door so you would owe me something, and I am not going to take your money so you can feel better about the 215 people who lost their jobs." I regretted the last sentence the moment it left my mouth, but I did not take it back because it was true, and because taking it back would have been a different kind of dishonesty. Victoria's face did not change, but something behind her eyes closed. She nodded once, slowly, and turned back to the window. Declan came inside and announced that the road might open within the hour. Victoria picked up her coat from the chair, folded the blanket I had given her, and placed it neatly on the seat. She thanked me formally, correctly, the way you thank a hotel concierge, and walked toward the door. Declan carried the leather bag and followed her without a word. I stood in the doorway and watched them get into the sedan. The engine started on the first try. The tires found traction on the packed snow, and the black car pulled out of the car park and disappeared down the mountain road, leaving nothing behind but tire tracks that the next snowfall would erase. Victoria Lennox drove away carrying the weight of two failures, one public, one private. She could not save her company, and she could not save the one person who had seen her as something other than a title. The service station was quiet again. I closed the door and stood in the empty room, looking at the folded blanket, that chipped mug, the space where a stranger had sat and accidentally become something more. I picked up the debt notice from the shelf where I had left it and read it again all the way through this time. Then I folded it and put it back. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed, and I was alone again, which was exactly what I had chosen. Sometime after the storm, the letter from the licensing board arrived. It came in a plain white envelope with a return address I had been dreading for months, and I opened it standing next to my truck in the service station car park because I did not want to read it inside the building where I slept. The language was formal and final. My independent contractor license had been suspended effective immediately, pending full resolution of outstanding debts. The review board noted my failure to respond within the required window and my inability to provide proof of financial remediation. In plain terms, it meant I could no longer legally work as a mechanic. The one skill that had defined me for my entire adult life, the thing my hands knew how to do better than anything else, had been taken away by a process I did not have the money to fight. I folded the letter and stood in the cold, looking at the fells. The snow from the storm had mostly melted on the road, but still clung to the higher elevations, white and indifferent. I thought about calling my son. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the number and stared at it for a long time, but I could not think of what I would say. I lost my license. I have nothing left. That was closer, but it sounded like a plea. And I had decided somewhere along the way that I would not become a man who begged his own child for comfort. So I put the phone away and went back inside and sat on the cot and did nothing because there was nothing left to do. Later I learned that in a glass-walled conference room in Manchester, Victoria Lennox sat at the head of a table she had sat at for over 2 decades and listened to the board of directors explain in measured and diplomatic language why her continued leadership was no longer in the best interest of the company. The formal vote was scheduled soon, but the outcome was already decided. She could see it in their faces, the careful avoidance of eye contact, the rehearsed sympathy, the way they addressed her as Victoria instead of Miss Lennox, as if softening the name would soften the blade. She had built this company from a 3-person office in a rented space above a hardware store. She had secured the first contract, signed the first client, survived the first recession, and now she was being removed from it the same way she had removed 215 employees from their jobs some time ago, efficiently, legally, and without anyone looking her in the eye. After the meeting, Victoria sat alone in her car in the parking garage beneath the building. Declan was in the driver's seat, waiting for instructions, but she gave none. She stared at her phone, scrolling through contacts, hundreds of names, industry leaders, politicians, lawyers, investors, and realized with a clarity that felt almost physical that there was not a single person in that list she could call, not to talk, not to be honest with, not to say, "I do not know what to do next." Every relationship in her phone was transactional. Every connection was contingent on her being the person at the top of the letterhead. Without the title, she was a stranger to all of them. The only person who had spoken to her, honestly in recent memory, was a broke mechanic in a service station who had told her the truth to her face and then let her leave. She thought about what I had said about the 215 people, about kindness not being currency. The words had stung when I said them, and they still stung now. But not because they were cruel, because they were accurate. She had offered me help the way she offered everything, as a transaction, a favor with an invisible ledger attached, and I had seen through it instantly. The way people who have nothing left can see through people who have everything except the one thing that matters. Victoria told Declan to drive. She did not tell him where. He pulled out of the garage and merged onto the motorway heading north, and she watched the city shrink behind them without saying a word. It took some hours to reach the mountain road. The road was clear now, patched with salt and sand, and the service station appeared around a bend looking exactly as she remembered. Small, worn, unremarkable, the kind of place you pass without noticing unless you have no other choice. Declan pulled into the lot and stopped the car. Victoria got out and walked to the front door and knocked. I opened it. I looked at her the way you look at something you have already filed away as finished. Surprise, then confusion, then a slow, cautious recognition that the story was not over yet. I did not say anything. I just stood in the doorway in a flannel shirt and work boots, holding a wrench I had been using on the generator, and waited for her to explain why she was standing on my doorstep again. "I'm not here as a CEO," Victoria said. She stood straight, but her voice was different from the last time. Not commanding, not clinical, but level in the way someone speaks when they have rehearsed nothing and are relying entirely on what is true. "I am probably not going to be a CEO much longer. The board is voting soon, and I already know the result." She looked at the service station behind me, at the dim light inside, at the life I was barely holding together. "I am here because you were right. What I offered you before was not help. It was a reflex. It was me doing what I always do, solving a problem with money so I do not have to feel anything about it. I leaned against the door frame. I did not invite her in. Not yet. I studied her face the way I studied machines, looking for the part that was not working, the thing that was out of alignment. "So, what are you here for?" I asked. Victoria reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out to me. "Before the board makes their decision, I set aside a portion of my personal equity to fund a project outside the company. Small-scale solar panel installation and maintenance for rural communities that cannot afford commercial contracts. It is legitimate, it is registered, and it is mine, not the company's." She kept her hand extended. "I need someone who knows machines, who knows how to fix things, who can work with small teams in places that most contractors will not drive to. I am not offering you charity, Callum. I am offering you a job, a real one, with a contract, fair pay, and no strings." I did not take the paper. I looked at it, then at her, then at the fells behind her, where the snow was still melting. I thought about the letter from the licensing board sitting on the shelf inside. I thought about the canned soup and the generator and the cot where I slept every night in a building that belonged to someone else. I thought about my father who drove 40 miles in a thunderstorm to pull a stranger out of a ditch and who never once asked for anything in return. But my father had also never turned down honest work when it was offered honestly. "If I do this," I said, "it is because the work makes sense, not because of what happened during the storm, not because you feel guilty, and not because I need saving." My voice was firm but not hard. It was the voice of a man drawing a line, not building a wall. Victoria nodded. "I understand." I took the paper. I unfolded it and read it standing in the doorway. It was a project brief: scope, timeline, locations, compensation. It was clean, professional, and fair. There was no mention of the storm, no mention of favors, no mention of anything except the work itself, and that more than anything else she could have said told me that she meant it. Before long, the project was launched. It was small: 3 rural counties, a handful of installations, a team of 5 including me. The work was hard and unglamorous. We drove dirt roads in trucks loaded with panels and wiring, set up systems on rooftops that had not seen maintenance in years, and spent long days in the sun doing the kind of physical labor that my body remembered even when my mind had forgotten. I was good at it, better than good. I had spent my whole life understanding how things worked, and solar panels were just another machine. Complex on paper, simple in practice, responsive to the same patient attention I had given every engine I had ever fixed. Victoria visited the sites occasionally, but she did not hover. She handled the business side, permits, contracts, funding, and she did it differently than before. She learned the names of the families whose homes we worked on. She sat at kitchen tables and drank bad coffee and listened to people talk about their electric bills and their worries and their kids. She did not fix those things, she just listened. And for a woman who had spent 23 years looking at spreadsheets instead of faces, that was the closest thing to a revolution she had ever experienced. The board voted as expected. Victoria was removed as CEO. But by the time the decision was formalized, she had already stepped into something else. Something smaller, less powerful, and infinitely more real. The rural solar project grew not into an empire, but into a sustainable operation that employed 12 people and served communities that the bigger companies had written off as unprofitable. Victoria ran it without a corner office, without a board, without anyone calling her Ms. Lennox in a tone that meant something other than her name. I got my license reinstated. The contract work provided enough income to resolve my outstanding debts, and a solicitor Victoria connected me with, at my request, not hers, navigated the review process. It took some time. When the letter came confirming the reinstatement, I read it at the same spot in the car park where I had read the suspension notice. I folded it and put it in my pocket and went back to work. I did not celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. What I felt was something quieter than relief. It was the sensation of standing on solid ground again after a long time spent falling. I moved out of the service station eventually and found a small rental near one of the project sites. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom with a kitchen and a porch that looked out at open land. I called my son one evening, not because I had good news to share, but because I wanted to hear his voice. The conversation lasted longer than any call we had had in over a year. My son did not say much, but he did not hang up early either. It was not reconciliation, it was a door opened a crack with light coming through. Victoria and I never became friends in the way most people understand the word. We did not share meals or call each other on holidays or talk about our feelings. What we had was something more durable. Mutual respect grounded in a night when both of us had been stripped of everything we used to hide behind and had chosen, despite every reason not to be honest. I had opened a door in a storm because my father taught me that nobody should sit in the dark alone. Victoria had come back because I taught her that help means nothing if it comes from above. The service station still stands on that mountain road. Harold never sold it. I still check on it sometimes, drive up on a weekend, and make sure the pipes have not frozen, the windows have not cracked. I do not sleep there anymore, but I keep the world's okayest dad mug on the shelf where it has always been, next to the space where the debt notice used to sit. The notice is gone now, the mug stays. Some things you lose, some things you keep. And sometimes on a night when the world shuts down and all the roads are closed, the only thing that saves you is a stranger who has nothing to offer except a door that opens from the inside. As I reflect on that fierce snowstorm in the Lake District, which brought Victoria and Declan to my abandoned service station off the A66, the most valuable life lesson I learnt, one that still stirs the deepest emotion in my heart, is that genuine kindness creates unbreakable bonds without any expectation of return. Alone with my meager possessions and a future in ruins after losing my engine repair shop, I opened the door to strangers not for gain, but because my late father had taught me that nobody should sit in the dark alone. In the dim glow of the space heater, as Victoria shared her regrets over the company she built in Manchester, and the painful distance from her son in Edinburgh, while I confessed my own failures and the silence from my boy in Leeds, we both realized our struggles were mirrors of each other. Her later return to offer me honest work on rural solar projects across the fells, not as a wealthy savior, but as an equal, proved that true help heals only when it comes from mutual respect rather than pity or power. This experience has left me profoundly moved, reminding me and every one of us that in life's coldest moments, when roads vanish and hope feels buried, a simple act of humanity can transform despair into renewed purpose and isolation into lasting connection, teaching us to cherish empathy above all else. If this heartfelt lesson resonates with you and stirs memories of your own unexpected kindness, do share your stories in the comments below. I read every one. And if it has touched your soul, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another inspiring tale of redemption from these quiet corners of Britain.